I used to work at a hospital data center in the network operations group. We physically sat in a room 24/7 next to the servers to make sure things didn't catch on fire, monitored for alerts, and did routine things like swap out tape backups, but it was pretty simple work. This was ostensibly a tech job, but there were people who had been there for many years back when you had to change out printer paper and run a command from an IBM mainframe. It was on really specialized hardware and software that was difficult to apply elsewhere, so it had become a dead-end job. And because there were people who weren't tech-savvy at all really, we weren't given much responsibility. You can't tell some people they can log into a server and others not, so we were reduced to the lowest common denominator. We were a network operations center where nobody was allowed to interact with any network equipment. Lowest common denominator, you say? Meet my new supervisor, Karen, not her real name but definitely her real spirit, had been there for over 20 years and got the job solely based on seniority. She was a sociopathic narcissist and one of the most unpleasant people I've ever encountered. Shortly after I was hired, we were bought by another hospital and combined data centers. Karen was demoted to shift lead and had to work with us in the 24/7 rotation. She was very bad at her job, and our responsibilities diminished to very little. We had no agency to fix any problems of our own because it had to be a problem that Karen could solve, and Karen was both lazy and stupid. After a couple of years, I was promoted. On my first day after they announced the promotion, she said, "You will fail." Just straight to my face. But she had a powerful tool at her disposal, the hospital bureaucracy. Since the place was unionized, the hospital had a just cause firing policy instead of an at-will policy, even for non-unionized employees. This is, I think, generally a good thing. But on the edges, it set up ridiculous situations where it was impossible to lose your job unless you were really egregious about it with repeated violations or you showed up drunk/high. We had someone steal computer equipment and they kept their job. It was nuts. And Karen had been there for nearly 30 years. So she wasn't getting fired without a lot of work. That's okay. She was terrible at her job. One of the most important things about the job was monitoring for an alert which would pop up, and there was a procedure we had to go through for some data to go through. If we didn't do this, then a nurse wouldn't get their lab results back. So in one case, an alert came in, Karen saw it, then decided to keep browsing the web. Because of this, a patient from the cardiac ICU was going into surgery, and the doctors/nurses operating on the patient couldn't get a white blood cell count, which is something very dangerous for this patient, and the patient died. This still did not get Karen fired. The reasoning from HR, well, it didn't directly lead to harm. She didn't even feel bad about it. Just a complete soulless sociopath. I'm real pro-worker in general, but some jobs you just absolutely have to do. I was so mad. She had to go. I kept a paper trail of everything she messed up on. It wasn't nitpicky. Literal life and death stuff here. Verbal warning, first written warning, second written warning, final written warning, termination. A slog, and I'd rather spend my time doing anything else, but that's the way it went. Then she figured out she could work the system. As she approached work Armageddon, termination, she would tell HR she was being harassed. The person harassing her was different every time, which would trigger a mandatory investigation. This investigation took about 6 months. They wouldn't find anything, and we would carry on. Except these warnings? They had a 6-month expiration. So she could always reset the clock when it got close. Everyone was helpless. Even the CIO couldn't do anything about it because of the bureaucracy. Karen was a menace, and the entire IT department had to interact with the data center staff, and that meant interacting with her, and she was universally disliked. And she had 20 years until retirement, and she would outlast the heat death of the universe. Then I had an idea. What if, under the guise of developing skills relevant to the 21st century, required everyone working in the Network Operations Center to pass the Net Plus exam? It's not a difficult exam, but it's not trivially easy. I felt pretty sure that everyone on the team fell above the line between able to pass and not able to pass except Karen. We would give everyone better titles, a significant pay raise, and entrusted to do more with the equipment, which is something everyone desperately wanted. Then people could actually leave the hospital with transferable skills and do something else if they wanted and not feel trapped. I spent 3 years in meetings with HR, with my director, with the CIO, with HR again. Job description meetings that took 6 hours to tweak small wording. Hundreds of hours in meetings. Red tape hell. Absolute red tape hell. Do you have any idea what it takes to approve a significant raise in a bureaucratic muck factory like that? But the raises were crucial because it would absolutely not be fair to ask this of them. Pass a test or lose your job without a large carrot attached would lead to mutiny. And then it got approved. I also wrote the exam requirement into my job description. It was important to still be able to do the job and not let my skills lapse just because I was promoted, but also this meant I could cover for people when they were on vacation or sick. Plus, I also got that sweet pay bump. It went over well. I was nervous, but the plan made sense, and I was able to communicate that. People would be more marketable. The job would be more interesting. And most importantly, they would be making 20% more than they were before. And I think it really helped that I also gave myself the same requirement when I absolutely could have chosen not to. The hospital would pay for off-site training. They would still get paid their full hourly during the training, including shift differential for second and third shifts. We paid for all the materials. I scheduled 8 hours a week for people to go someplace quiet and study. The job itself had a ton of downtime, so people could study, but this was formally carved out time anyway. We paid for the exam. And if they failed, we'd pay for the second attempt. We were given 8 months to pass the test, so this is how it was for the 8 months. I did not want Karen to have any excuse whatsoever and somehow convince HR that this process was rushed or unfair. Everyone passed on the first attempt except Karen. Karen did not pass her second or her third attempt, a bonus attempt. Karen, being the classic narcissist, thought this was somehow all about her. That this was a vast conspiracy engineered over multiple years and hundreds of hours just to get rid of her, and she would tell everyone within earshot that's what was going on. Yeah, okay, Karen. You realize how insane that sounds, right? Not everything is about you, sheesh. Well, okay, in this case, it is, but still. Only I, and 2 other people, know that. I remember the exact time and date we told her. She was in such deep denial that it could ever happen. She thought she was bulletproof. I don't think I will ever achieve anything more satisfying in my career. I'm not usually one to take satisfaction in seeing someone's livelihood go, but she was uniquely awful. She was a patient danger, and it had been nearly a decade of working with her by this point, and I was just so sick and tired of her bullshit. I was a hero the day after she was fired. I went to the main office for a meeting, and people were congratulating me like I just had a kid or won a marathon or something. Even the CIO. They were just happy for me that I didn't have to supervise Karen anymore. But in my headcanon, they were congratulating me for pulling off this elaborate plan. Morale back at the data center was also high. We learned interesting things. A couple of my coworkers left for better gigs elsewhere, smiley face. The ones who were content staying were able to stay, and we all had more money and job security. And because anything could set off a bullshit Karen harassment complaint, people were stressed out working with her. Her being gone was like a breath of fresh air. Newcomers were told stories of Karen, and they seemed exaggerated. They were not. In order to solve a very important and extremely difficult problem, I pulled off a vast workplace conspiracy that improved the lives of the people I worked with in addition to keeping our patients safe. Getting Karen fired is my greatest and most difficult accomplishment, and I can't put it on a CV anywhere.
In the heart of my grandmother's hometown, my maternal family was renowned for one thing: their fiery tempers and explosive outbursts. These were qualities that could turn everything red and cloud one's vision with rage, traits that seemed to be passed down from generation to generation. And in our family, no one embodied these characteristics more infamously than my great-grandmother, Mama Delia. Mama Delia was a formidable woman, known for her sharp tongue and a readiness to back her words with her fists. With Mama Delia at the helm, making even the slightest mistake, no matter how trivial, was akin to a death sentence. She held a firm grip over her household, and no one dared to challenge her authority. Mama Delia was married to my great-grandfather, a respected magistrate in the Supreme Court of Justice in our country. According to my father, he was a good man, highly esteemed by all. But the moment he crossed the threshold of their home, his authority ceased, and Mama Delia's tyrannical rule took over. Nothing was done or undone without her will, and, As you can imagine, my grandmother, her siblings, and later, my father's generation, resented her profoundly. The impact of Mama Delia's ruthless temperament left deep scars in the hearts of her family members, and her legacy of anger and violence still lingers in our family's collective memory. Mama Delia's wrath spared no one. She was uncompromising and relentless in her discipline, and her preferred methods were verbal and physical abuse. With Mama Delia, a slip-up meant punishment, and those who crossed her path would be subjected to her violent outbursts. My great-grandparents had 4 sons, but it was Jose, the second son, who became the most rebellious and stood up against Mama Delia's tyranny. He was the one who refused to endure her mistreatment any longer. It was when Jose reached the age of 15 that he made a decision. He would never allow himself to be abused by his mother again. Mama Delia didn't take this rebellion well. One day, Jose did something that deeply upset her. The specifics of the event remain unknown to me, but it was a turning point. If this had happened years earlier, Mama Delia would have responded with her usual weapons, leashes and shouting. However, by now, Jose had grown taller and stronger than his mother. Mama Delia had to resort to an alternative plan. She called a policeman to their home with specific instructions: give Jose the beating of his life. The day Jose left his parents' home was the last time he would endure his mother's cruelty. Yet, in my family, we hold a deep belief that family is the most significant bond, one that is nearly impossible to escape. For years later, my great-grandparents moved to a new house in another part of town, next door to the Cordobez family. The parents of the Cordobez family were typical, everyday people. However, their son, Ruben, was an entirely different story. At around 25 years old, Ruben lived a life devoid of work, study, or household responsibilities. He dedicated all his time and energy to 2 things: bulking up until he resembled a South American Arnold Schwarzenegger, and verbally assaulting my grandparents whenever he saw them strolling down the street. As for the reasons behind Ruben's aggression, my father could only speculate. It could have been Ruben's nature, or perhaps Mama Delia had done something to provoke him at some point. No one really knew, and the Cordobez family never divulged the true reasons behind Ruben's intense hostility. Ruben's aggressiveness toward my great-grandparents reached an extreme level. He wouldn't even allow them to walk on his side of the sidewalk. Yet, my great-grandparents remained silent. Inexplicably, they kept the torment they faced at the hands of Ruben a secret from the rest of the family. That's when Jose stepped back into the picture. His relationship with Mama Delia was strained and complicated, yet he still visited his parents from time to see his father and his 3 siblings. One fateful day, my great-grandparents were returning home, and Ruben's familiar onslaught of insults, taunts, and obscenities greeted them as they opened their front door. What Ruben didn't anticipate was that Jose was also arriving at the same moment. He overheard Ruben's barrage of insults and was overtaken by rage. Just like Mama Delia, when Jose was engulfed by anger, the world first turned black, and then everything became tinged with red. And just like Mama Delia, he couldn't suppress his explosive reaction. In the blink of an eye, Jose lunged at Ruben not once but 3 times. Each time, Ruben effortlessly deflected Jose's attacks, knocking him to the ground without much effort. Most individuals would have retreated at this point, deterred by the fierce resistance. But Jose was not like most individuals. He was accustomed to pain, blood, and the bruises that lingered for weeks after his confrontations. He had long since conquered his fear of fighting. Jose stood up one final time, despite the insults and taunts from Reuben. He charged at his adversary, and in an unexpected moment, landed a well-placed kick on Reuben's shin. It destabilized Reuben. He wavered. Although Reuben hadn't fallen to the ground, the tide had turned. Reuben didn't know it, but he had already lost. Jose leaped onto Reuben's back, like a rider at a wild bull riding event, gripping him by the head, and slammed Reuben's face repeatedly onto the pavement. Blood flowed freely, and pieces of teeth were scattered on the ground. Yet, Jose's fury remained unquenched. With an iron grip on Reuben's hair, he dragged him up and down the street twice, until my older great-uncle intervened. Reuben ended up in the hospital with an unrecognizable and disfigured face. After his shocking ordeal, Jose disappeared for a week, seeking to evade any possible retaliation. My great-grandparents never faced problems with Reuben again, and Jose's relationship with Mama Delia, despite the violent episode, showed no signs of improvement. The story ended with Reuben in the hospital, his face transformed beyond recognition, and my uncle seeking refuge to avoid any consequences. Reuben's reign of terror over my great-grandparents had come to a screeching halt, and he would never dare to cross paths with them again. Yet, the relationship between Jose and Mama Delia remained contentious, despite the dramatic events of that day. In the annals of my family history, this saga serves as a testament to the enduring and complex nature of familial bonds, as well as the unyielding spirit of a son who refused to tolerate injustice, even in the face of formidable odds.